What is up, everyone? I'm CB Imprint Productions, and after 2.5 years, we are finally back for another installment of the Marvel Imprint Retrospective. Today, we'll be looking at the third installment of the Kingsman franchise, but this time around, we won't be focusing on the adventures of Eggsy and Harry. Instead, we'll be focusing on the formation of the Kingsman Secret Service itself, and how it came to be in the Kingsman. This one started development around June 2018. After the financial success of Kingsman: The Golden Circle, despite not being well reviewed, Matthew Vaughn and 20th Century Fox carried on to develop more installments to build out this Kingsman world, both in the form of movies and TV series. During interviews, Matthew Vaughn stated that a Kingsman prequel was in development, called Kingsman: The Great Game, and would be shot back to back with the proper Kingsman 3. But that plan would eventually change due to development on this film going faster than the Kingsman 3, and Vaughn and his studio just decided to focus on this venture for this time being. Throughout the remainder of 2018 and early 2019, the film gathered its cast, which gathered the likes of Ray Fiennes, who also worked as a producer on the film, Risa Fons, Daniel Bruhl, Digimon Hansu, Tom Hollander, Aaron Taylor Johnson, who previously worked with Vaughn on Kick-Ass, and so many other cast members. The film began shooting in January 2019, despite some of the casting had yet to be done. It would wrap up a few months later. During the back half of 2019, the film had changed its title from Kingsman: The Great Game to The Kingsman, as Vaughn stated that The Great Game was just a working title, and the film would start to roll out its marketing, with 2 trailers released, posters, ads, and quite a bit more. But that will all go to waste, as this film was going to be delayed more times than the New Mutants. Originally slated for a November 2019 release date in the States, which seems like a cursed release slot for several of these delayed movies like Wonder Woman and No Time to Die, the film would first get bumped to Valentine's Day 2020, and then later to September 2020 due to basic development issues with the film, along with the fact that during the film's principal photography, Disney was wrapping up acquiring Fox, and that would change the power structure and decision making over there, with Fox no longer being its own studio, and now being the branch of a bigger studio, with Disney now making its decisions for them. And then... Now, when the COVID pandemic hit the world by storm and all the lockdowns began, this film was not affected at the time, due to many people thinking this virus would clear up by the summer, and many of the films slated for the back half of the year were not delayed yet, including The Kingsman. Due to not slated to come out until September, but as the pandemic dragged on until late summer, and especially after the underperformance of films like New Mutants, Unhinged, and Tenet, not laying at the box office because people were scared to go back to the movies, along with a lot of big markets like New York and LA still being closed, as much to Christopher Nolan's dismay, Disney got cold feet and delayed several of their movies once again, as this one was delayed to February 26, 2021, in late August, 3 weeks before it was set to come out. Then the film was bumped 2 weeks forward to February 12th, when Disney delayed its MCU slate again in late 2020, and put The Kingsman on a date previously slated for Eternals. But once again, because of the pandemic, and the fact that Disney couldn't put any of these Fox films on streaming because of the previously contractual obligations pre-merger that they had to require to, it was delayed 3 more times, first to March 12th, then to August 20th, and then finally to December 22nd, 2021. A little over 2 years from its original release dates, and nearly 3 years since it began shooting. And since the film's come out, reviews have been very mixed to say the least, just like The Golden Circle. And the film so far has not had a great financial performance, coming in 4th place on its opening weekend, and making chump change compared to the previous installments, partially due to the crowded Christmas release schedule this year, not to mention the pandemic is still raging on, and the reception hasn't helped it either. Despite this, Matthew Vaughn is still adamant on making more Kingsman installments, with him saying during press interviews for this film that Kingsman 3 is ready to shoot in September next year, when Taron Egerton, Colin Firth, and more returning. But will that still happen after the performance of this film? Well, we'll see what happens. Anyways, with the history out of the way, let's get into the plots. We start with the film in 1902 as we're introduced to the Oxford family. The patriarch of the family, Orlando, played by Ray Fiennes, is a British aristocrat and pacifist and the Duke of Oxford. Not to mention, he works for the Red Cross, alongside his wife Emily, the Duchess of Oxford, played by Alexandra Maria Lara, and their young son Conrad accompanying them with one of their servants, Shola, played by Digimon Hansu. While visiting a concentration camp in South Africa during the Boer War to try and help any wounded soldiers or civilians, Emily is shot and killed by a sniper trying to ambush the camp, leaving Orlando a widow and Conrad without a mother. We then cut to 12 years later, as Orlando is setting up a spy network to prevent the British Empire from approaching the Great War, as it was called at the time, and recruits the help of Shola, along with one of his cunning mates, probably played by Gemma Arterton. Meanwhile, an 18-year-old Conrad, now played by Harris Dickinson, is eager to join the fight against his impending world war, wanting to get the same level of recognition and experience that his father had in his heyday. But Orlando doesn't want to lose another family member of his, and goes to great lengths to make sure that Conrad doesn't get enlisted, including speaking with the War Secretary Herbert Kitchener, played by Charles Dance, and his right-hand man Captain Morton, played by Matthew Good, while they're getting suits at a local tailor shop, Kingsman, to further cement that Conrad doesn't become a soldier. But Conrad does speak with Morton that he can contact him whenever he's ready to join the fight. Meanwhile, in a secret base at the top of a mountain in Scotland, our main villain of the film, only known as a shepherd thus far, has a fascination with goats and lives in a barn. where he has all his meetings, and is planning to wipe England off the face of the earth through the Great War, with the help of his associates being essential into getting inside all 3 different leaders of Russia, Emperor Tsar Nikolai, Germany, Emperor Kaiser Wilhelm II, and England, King George V, all played by Tom Hollander, and instigating events that would set up this war, such as when Orlando and Conrad head to Bosnia to meet with the Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife. After a failed assassination attempt during a parade that is saved by Conrad, the assassin is about to kill himself with one of those little cyanide pills hidden in these rings that Shepard gave to all the members of his group. He spots the 4 of them in the alleyway, once again, and ends up taking both the Ferdinands out and the Great War begins. Following that event, Conrad wants to help stop this war desperately. In response, he lets Conrad in on his big secret that he, Paulie, and Shola have been secretly tracking all the events that have transpired leading up to this war, and believe that the assassin that took out the Ferdinands was part of a bigger scheme to instigate this war. And they also believe that there are other agents working for this plot as well, including Russian mystic and trusted advisor to the Russian Emperor, Grigory Rasputin, played by Ray Zafons. Rasputin tries to convince the Russian Emperor to pull out of this war after he poisons his son, unbeknownst to him, acting like it's a sign from God to get him to stop being involved, that will leave the Western ally vulnerable. Conrad finds out about this, so he sends the info to Kitchener and Morton, and as they set sail to Russia, their ship gets blown up via a submarine attack. After Orlando hears about this, he decides to take care of this Rasputin problem himself as he, Conrad, Paulie, and Shola all head to a Christmas party in Russia, hosted by Conrad's cousin Orlando's nephew, where they know Rasputin will be present. After Orlando is able to get into a room alone with Rasputin, he tries to find any information about him while Rasputin's healing his wounded leg that was caused by him getting shot in the thigh by a sniper in the beginning of the movie, and somehow Rasputin heals it by gorging down on some of Paulie's cake and vomiting it back up. But Rasputin also knows that Orlando is playing tricks on him, so after he heals his leg, Rasputin starts to drown him in ice-cold Russian water, but Rasputin doesn't know that Conrad and Shola are on the other side of the door, listening to him and Orlando's whole conversation leading up to that. When they hear him getting drowned, they burst into the room and fight Rasputin, with him being hard to keep down from a 3-on-1 fight against all of them, even after being stabbed and drowned by Orlando after he comes to his senses. But he is shot point blank in the head by Paulie after she hears all the ruckus that ensued. Because of this, the Shepard recruits Vladimir Lytton to pick up where Rasputin left off. And soon Russia leaves the war while another one of Shepard's henchmen, Erich Hansun, who's also an advisor to the German Emperor, played by Daniel Bruhl, sends the Zimmerman telegram, a telegram that was sent to Mexico to ask for alliance between them and Germany if the US entered the war. But Paulie is able to crack the code in this message, and they send it to the US president at the time, Woodrow Wilson, played by Ian Kelly, but he still isn't convinced and needs concrete proof in order to get involved. Meanwhile, Conrad celebrates his 19th birthday, and the fact that he is now old enough to enlist in the war. Orlando doesn't want him to go, but Conrad goes anyway. During one last attempt to get him back, Orlando meets with King George to try and send Conrad back home, but Conrad is able to outsmart his dad and swap places with another young soldier, Archie Reed, played by Aaron Taylor Johnson, and sends him to his dad's estate, giving him the nickname Lancelot. As Conrad is in no man's land, he volunteers to retrieve a vital piece of information that was scattered by a spy that gets blown up during a friendly fire. So he and 5 other soldiers go in the middle of the night to retrieve this information, but find themselves in a battle with a number of German soldiers. But they all decide to keep it close quarters and use no guns, only knives, so they all don't get shot in the process. Then, a brutal battle ensues as everyone but Conrad is killed viciously. Then he runs into a hole as he finds the soldiers that they were sent to retrieve. The spy asks for Conrad just to run back with the info, but he carries the spy all the way back to his side in no man's land, but he's hit with an explosion at the last minute, causing the spy to get killed on impact. But Conrad is still alive and with the information. But when he says his name is Archie Reed when asked, trying to keep a low profile, one of the soldiers there, who claims to be a friend of Archie, knows it's not him and thinks he's a German spy and shoots Conrad point blank in the head. But his information still makes it back and could end this war for good. As Orlando is drinking himself to death because of the guilt of letting his son go into the war, Paulie and King George inform him that the information his son retrieved is revealed to be that Woodrow Wilson is being blackmailed by the Shepard through having a video of Wilson being seduced by one of his agents, Mazahari, played by Valerie Pachner, in the Oval Office, and if the video gets out, it will distract America's interest from the war and ruin Wilson's reputation. Orlando then decides to put down the booze and end this war once and for all. He goes to the American embassy to tell the ambassador, played by Stanley Tucci, about what they have found, but before that, he spots Harry and chokes her out with their own scarf while in a deadly fight. And the ambassador says that the US will join the war if he's able to find the original negative of the film that proves Wilson's adultery and destroy it. Orlando is able to find the Shepard's base at Operation through Harry's scarf, which is made with a specific wool only made in a certain region of Scotland. So Orlando, Paulie, and Shola head to the Shepard's base to find the negative and stop the Shepard once and for all. After a treacherous time of Orlando trying to get to the top of this cliffside that the Shepard's base is on, he's able to find the Shepard and kill all of his henchmen, as Paulie and Shola take everyone from the ground up. Then Shola rides up to the top of this cliffside, using his rope-implemented pulley system, as the two find the Shepard, who's actually revealed to be Captain Morton, who's presumed dead years prior in a sub-attack, but as he's doing the typical mustache-twirling monologue, The third scene in the shooting battle before the Shepherd and Orlando go one-on-one in a sword fight, that Orlando wins with the help of one of Shepherd's ghosts that he abused earlier in the film, stabbing him in the thigh, and Orlando throws him off the cliff, falling to his death. As Paulie gets negative at the film after the guy that was meant to send it, out to the public, falls to his death also when the rope elevator shaft was caught by Shola. The three are able to stop the war with the US getting involved, and are proclaimed heroes by King George. Then, a year later, Orlando buys up the Kingsman tailor shop, wanting to use it as a front for a secret spy organization, and recruits Paulie, Shola, Archie, King George, and the US ambassador to be the first generation of the Kingsmen, with each getting their own codename based on the King Arthur legend, in honor of Conrad, as credits roll to a mid-credit scene, consisting of the remaining members of Shepherd's organization, trying to pick up where he left off. Consisting of Ergen Hansoon, introducing Vladimir Lenin to a young Adolf Hitler as the head of their next plan, setting up a sequel that we most likely won't get, as the film ends. This is without doubt a step up from Kingsman Golden Circle in a lot of ways. Matthew Vaughn strips himself of a lot of the goofiness that made that film suffer from not being able to be taken seriously and felt more like parody. Now, there's definitely still goofiness present in this film, but it's more on the lines of the first Kingsman film, where it doesn't feel so out of place that it takes you out of the film. Across the board, the cast is incredibly talented, and they all give their A game here. Ralph Fiennes is an A-class actor, and he sells every scene he's in, no matter what circumstances he's involved in. From dialogue scenes to action scenes to comedic scenes, Ralph Fiennes gives us all, and you can definitely feel it in his performance here. Digimon Hansu is also really good as Shola. He's one of those working class actors you just seen a million things. Hell, I've seen this guy in numerous comic book movies I've reviewed, both Marvel and DC, and he's always a welcome presence here and never brings a dull performance. And this is no exception. And being his little companion to the Oxford family, and being a badass alongside that. Risa Fonse's Rasputin is a show stealer in this film as well. This role could have been toxic on screen and just not worked if this was handled a little too over the top by the actor or Matthew Vaughn, but they're able to find that right pitch to where he's just over the top enough to where you can't take your eyes off him when he's on screen, because he's just such a unique and demanding presence within the film. And you can tell this actor is taking this role as seriously as the other actors involved, and that's what makes his comedy scenes that much more resonant. Because you believe Risa Fonse is Rasputin, whenever he's devouring a cake while trying to fix Orlando's leg, and he's also really good in his action scenes here. I really do wish he was more involved in the film. I was shocked when he was killed halfway through the film because the marketing made it seem like he was the big villain of the movie, but oh well. The other notable actors in smaller roles such as Charles Dance, Daniel Bruhl, Aaron Taylor Johnson, Tom Hollander, Stanley Tucci, and the remainder of the cast are all really good in their roles here, and apart from the main villain, I believed in all their roles and they all added something to the film. And they performed their parts well, especially Tom Hollander playing three separate but similar characters. And lastly, when talking about the acting, I do want to mention the two newcomers to the cast that I haven't seen in any films or shows I can think of before this film, Gemma Arterton and Harris Dickinson. They are both wondrous in this movie. Speaking of the latter first, Harris Dickinson as Conrad is really solid wanting to be a hero and help stop the war that is raging on the world. And you can tell he's doing this because he knows it's the right thing and noble. And whenever he gets into fights with his dad over wanting to be enlisted, you do understand both sides of why he should and shouldn't go off to war. He does a really good banter against the rest of the cast, and he also sells his action very well. He also has a very broad range of emotions, from being charismatic, scared, tense, and heroic all over the course of this movie. And when he got killed 2/3 into the movie, I was genuinely shocked because I wanted more of his character and his performance. And last but certainly not least, Gemma Arterton as Paulie, who's essentially a female Alfred, but with a lot more wit and sass to her, is fantastic in this film. She's definitely my new favorite character in this movie, from her mannerisms and banter against Ralph Fiennes and the majority of the castmates, but still being able to be sweet and helpful when the time comes for it, making this character feel more grounded in a ridiculous world. Her line delivery is on point, her action is solid, and she was just such a fun character to be around that I wouldn't mind seeing her again in a sequel down the line. And that goes for the rest of the cast as well. The film implements a lot of the real world history into this film, being set during World War I, and while this isn't the first comic book film to incorporate fictional characters in a non-fiction setting, I mean the first Wonder Woman did that 4.5 years prior. I do remember when this film was set to come out in early 2020, I would always confuse this film's trailers with 1917s quite often. But regardless, I still do like that you get a really neat history lesson out of this film with how many real life figures are involved in this film's narrative. It was actually quite interesting to see. Not to mention the production design is gorgeous, and it makes the entire film capture that period piece aesthetic, from the clothes, buildings, cars, technology, and more, that I really enjoyed seeing all this come to life, in a very well made production. The co-writing and directing from Matthew Vaughn is really solid once again here. Even in a bad movie like Golden Circle was, there's not one single film in this man's career that you don't feel the passion he puts in front of the camera. He always seems like he loves making movies, and his directing always is super bombastic and full of energy, and this film's no exception. So many shots in this film, like every single comic book film he's done previously, feel straight homage to the source material he's adapting, because it feels like shots that belong in a comic book. He's able to direct the actors very well, the action scenes are very fluid and full of life, regardless if it's hand-to-hand fights or shootouts in no man's land. They have great choreography, and there's not many hard cuts that we get with a lot of mainstream action nowadays. Especially the whole scene towards the end involving Ralph Fiennes trying to get to the top of this villain's base, and is constantly a stitch away from death. On top of that, the editing is also pretty solid as well. It keeps the pacing very solid, the scenes are also structured pretty decently stacked against one another, the score is also very good and implemented in the sound mixing very well, and overall it's just a solidly entertaining film that I had an enjoyable time watching. And it was definitely better than I was expecting given the reviews and how Golden Circle turned out. Although we most likely won't get a sequel to this prequel world, given the box office performance, the mixed reviews, and this being a film that was shelved for years just like New Mutants, but if we do ever get a sequel to this, I would definitely check it out. Now, for how much this film improves on the mistakes of Golden Circle, this is still a far cry from the greatness of that first Kingsman film. And this film most likely will be the kiss of death to this franchise. That has so much potential and it's just gotten squandered from how bad Golden Circle was, and how this film just isn't doing well for the public, which is a shame. For how much the movie downscales the goofiness of the previous Kingsman film, there's still an amount that just doesn't work in the context of this movie, primarily in the villains. The Shepherd is a pretty weak and forgettable villain out of the ones we've gotten in all three of these movies. His over-the-top aura, if you will, just didn't work for me. I felt like I was watching a Saturday morning cartoon amongst all these realistic war-setting stuff. Because there was absolutely no depth to his performance or motivations of the character for why he's doing the things he's doing other than he's evil. And with the whole reveal of who he was, because they kept him in shadows for most of the runtime, I just didn't care. Although the final fight between him and Orlando was pretty neat, especially whenever the film cuts to the POV shots of the swords, but as a whole, he was just a pretty underwhelming villain, and I found his henchmen to be more interesting than he was. Going alongside that, the tonal inconsistency of this movie just felt off to me. The first half to 2/3 was pretty serious, minus the Rasputin stuff, and after Conrad dies, which we'll get into that later, it then becomes a lot more jovial, like a typical Kingsman film. For the majority of the runtime, you swear you're just watching a slightly over the top World War I biopic, because it takes a long time for the film to feel like a Kingsman prequel, and when those elements come into play, especially in that final scene, the dots don't completely come together for me. I feel like a smooth transition from the 3 to 4 people doing the underground missions, to then creating a new Secret Service. I just couldn't fully buy into it, given the events that transpired in this movie, and the fact that it mostly consists of characters that were barely used in the runtime. Another issue I found in the film was the plot structure and certain decisions that Matthew Vaughn and his co-writer decided to implement. I felt it was really Conrad was killed off in the film. Throughout the movie, I felt like it was building up to him being the one that launched the Kingsman Secret Service, and that Orlando would perish. With it being the other way around, it just kind of felt weird to me that the dad was the one who carried on. Not just because his grieving was incredibly rushed and you don't feel the impact of his character's death, but it also just feels like wasted potential that you call it the future for the spin-off series. Even if this did get a follow-up, do you really expect Ray Fiennes to be willing to do all these fight scenes again? He is getting up there in age, especially after the 3-year gap between filming and this film getting released alone. It just felt odd to me, and Conrad felt like a missing piece of the puzzle when it came to this final battle. Another big issue I found was that we really didn't get enough of the espionage for this film. For a movie telling us about how this spy organization came to be, there really isn't a whole lot of espionage present in this movie. Although we do get elements like decrypting Morse code and globetrotting, with the exception of the Rasputin Christmas party scene, there's not another scene in this film that really includes our main characters actually acting like spies, which is such a shame. And it also confuses me if Orlando was so scared of his son being killed in action. Why are you letting him come with you to fight a dangerous individual like Rasputin? And whenever he still wants to go to war, even though he should probably be scarred from nearly getting his neck snapped, why just go on more missions with him to fulfill that need? Not to mention I felt the whole thing about Rasputin healing Orlando's leg from his supposed powers was an incredibly lazy writing choice. Although these characters are fun to watch on screen, apart from Orlando and Conrad, we don't get a whole lot of backstory for the rest of the cast, which is why I felt it was unfair to the majority of the people that made the Kingsman Secret Service like Archie Reed, the Ambassador, King George, etc. are all side characters that only get a couple scenes and not much else to do. As a whole, for how much this movie does right, there are some integral issues that could have been fixed given a couple more revisions on the script, and could have met its full potential instead of just being another average comic book film. All in all, The Kingsman is a decent prequel that was better than I expected it to be, given all the delays and how badly Golden Circle was, but it still doesn't reach anywhere near the heights of that original Kingsman film, in a movie that most likely will put this franchise to bed for the foreseeable future. On the good side, the acting is stellar across the board. The directing is great once again from Matthew Vaughn, the action's handled very well, the production side is impeccable, making this feel like World War I times, the pacing is solid and keeps it from getting really stale, the editing's decent, the score's quite good, the writing takes a step up from the Golden Circle, and was an entertaining ride, but the villain feels out of place and is incredibly weak. There are a few weird creative choices that hinder the film's story, the characters aren't as fully realized as they should be, the tone of the film's quite all over the place, and the film doesn't do a good job of making this feel like a proper installment of this franchise with how little it incorporates the actual spy elements of the Kingsman that builds out those first 2 films. And it didn't sell me that these characters would create Kingsman, which should be this prequel's main job, but to me it just felt more like a World War I biopic with a lot more creative liberties for the most parts. But as a whole, I would be lying if I say I didn't have a good time watching this film and would be down to see where these characters go next, if we ever do get a sequel. I give The Kingsman a B, a 7.5 out of 10, and a rental recommendation. So that's the Kingsman. What do you guys think about it? Leave your thoughts down in the comments, and please make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more content. I'm CB Imprint Productions, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace out.